You're listening to eLearnChat, where talk is knowledge.
Hello and welcome to eLearnChat, our new podcast featuring prominent leaders, shakers and movers in the e-learning and training industry. Your co-hosts are Rick Zanotti and Terrence Wing.
The show is sponsored by Relate Corporation at www.relate.com and by Liquid Learn at www.liquidlearn.com. Hi everyone, I am Rick Zanotti and welcome to our 9th episode of eLearnChat, where talk is knowledge. Today we've got, as always, our co-host, Terrence Wing. Hi Terrence, how are you?
Hey, Rick, how are you? Hi, everybody. I think I just lost audio just as you were saying that, so I'm assuming you just introduced me. And as always, let me get my administrative stuff out of the way. You can watch this show live at justin.tv/RelateCorp. You can also see it simulcast at the ISD 2.0 site on Facebook, and that would be facebook.com/ISD20. And also on the Liquid Learn site. So we're spreading our wings and simulcasting to more and more places. Also, if you want to participate, please join our chat room in Justin TV, or you can tweet us at eLearnChat or at the hashtag at #eLearnChat, and we'll be monitoring all channels to see what your comments are. So restrooms are out the door and to the right, and Rick, I'll hand it over to you.
Or to the left, depending wherever you're standing.
That's
anyway,
right.
Today we have a special guest, Dan Pontefract from Vancouver, British Columbia, which is for all those who may not know, it's in beautiful Canada, and Vancouver is probably one of the prettiest places in the world. And Dan is joining us. His blog is Training Rec. I'm going to bring that up right now, which is a great name for a blog. Got to ask you how you got that one. And before we lose him, here is Dan.
Great sound effect. Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Terrence.
You're welcome.
How are you today, Dan?
I'm well. Thanks for the chance to hang out with you guys for a while here. I'm
no
looking
problem.
forward to it.
Well, same here. Now, Dan, you do a lot of work with, I'm going to bring up your blog again so people can see that again. Training Rec, how'd you come up with that? That's a great name, by the way. How'd you come up with that one?
Yeah, it's obviously a tongue-in-cheek kind of answer here. To me, I think, the whole world of training needs to evolve. And as such, I'm not necessarily suggesting that the entire profession is a train wreck, but I believe that we need to evolve from what was referred to as training to certainly something more like a collaborative ecosystem of learning. And as such, I think a play on words here is that I kind of speak about the realities of that transformation, and hence trainingrec.com is a place where I can spout off every now and then.
It's a real good idea, and I don't disagree with you at all. I think the training industry is interesting. If you look at it, for the last almost 30 years, they keep saying e-learning is brand new. And they keep saying it's brand new. It's only been around 30 years. At one point or other, it's going to be kind of an established field. But I think it hasn't quite taken the route it could have. What do you think? And also, I want to ask you a little bit what you consider e-learning 2.0.
Well, now we're getting into the monikers of 2.0, and those of us that have issues with said monikers can get a handle here in the chat stream. E-learning 2.0 to me is really just a sort of the evolution of where learning is going. So as much as we as society started putting E in front of everything, from performance to reading to learning, 2.0 to me is now sort of that next evolution. So here, when you think about e-learning 2.0, you've got one evolution after another evolution. So for me, learning was traditionally sort of in that classroom event. We added e-learning, which was then obviously the transition to having a lot of our materials available electronically. And now e-learning 2.0 to me is that next wave. That's, to me, how we might take sort of traditional formal learning and encapsulate that by the combination of informal and social learning. So in a nutshell, to me, anything with the E in front and then the 2.0 behind is sort of that next evolution to me, which is a collaborative learning environment that is part formal, part informal, and part social.
Yeah, makes sense. Terrence, anything going on in the chat room right now?
Nothing, no questions yet, but I definitely wanted to wish a happy holiday to Jeff because apparently it is a holiday in Australia today. So, and Jeff is one of our regulars from the Down Under. So happy holidays to you folks in Australia. Hey, Dan, I have a question for you, though. You talk a lot about enterprise learning, and I've heard you speak on enterprise learning, too. And Rick was asking me where you and I have met, and I'm thinking it was at the eLearning Guild, one of their DevLearn conferences. I'm thinking that's where it was. Or it could have been ASTD. I'm not 100% sure. But I know you do a lot of talking on enterprise learning, and there's a lot of meta talk out there, and so many people catch on to these buzzwords and the definitions start to run amok and astray. And so that we're on the same page, how do you define Enterprise 2.0 or Learning 2.0?
All right, so I'll probably take both of those separately. It's a great question. And yeah. I think it was eLearning Guild, to be honest, Terrence. And
okay.
Great to see you again. Hopefully you're in San Jose next week, actually.
I will be.
Oh, we're both going to be there. So are you going to be there?
Excellent. We can share a brew.
That sounds good. And if you drop by the Adobe booth, I'll actually be working in the Adobe booth. We're kind of guests for Adobe for the show. So
we're talking about tech knowledge for everybody listening. Okay. That's in San Jose next Tuesday, I believe it starts Monday or Tuesday. I think the pre-conference
and then
the Monday.
The expo is Wednesday and Thursday.
Indeed. No plug here, but I'm down there speaking with David Mallon of Burson. So I have the chance to speak about sort of the evolution of learning to an audience as well.
No, plug away. People want to know where you are.
What's your talk? What was the talk at ASTD Tech Knowledge?
The ASTD Tech Knowledge talk is sort of the evolution of social learning at the company where I work, which is TELUS, is a Canadian telecom company up here.
Great.
Okay, so back to the question, though, because I think it's important. To me, first of all, I think sort of collaborative-based learning is sort of three parts to a stool. One is I truly believe that organizations of any size really need to think through a better leadership model. And I'll come back to that in a second. But that's sort of one leg. Now, to your other question, Terrence, about the sort of Learning 2.0 and Enterprise 2.0, to me, Learning 2.0 is the evolution from training to collaborative-based learning. And collaborative-based learning can happen in a classroom, which I'll denote as formal learning. It could happen in an e-learning opportunity, which I'll also classify as formal. But I think it also is, as I mentioned earlier, really wrapped around now the recognition that informal and social learning are as much a part of that collaborative-based learning as anything. So in a nutshell, Learning 2.0 is formal, informal, and social, and we as learned learning professionals really need to wrap our heads around how we're going to educate our workforce, our organizations, our schools, our higher ed groups with the notion that we should apply a Learning 2.0 filter in everything that we do. This chat right here is as much about Learning 2.0 as anything. Now, the Enterprise 2.0 piece, again, for those who aren't familiar, really a term coined by Andy McAfee, now over at MIT. And to Andy at least, it's the use of social emergent software to allow a company to increase their performance, their connectivity, et cetera, inside of an organization. I'll take it one step further, and I'll call that collaboration. And what I mean by that is through social emergent software like this chat session right here, using things like wikis, blogs, microblogging, discussion forums, anything kind of 2.0-ish in technology nature, that to me is really the third leg of the stool. And if, as a learning professional, we're not thinking through those three legs of the stool, a leadership model that is much more transparent, affluent in terms of how one connects with other people, very communicative. Learning 2.0 is the use of formal and informal social practices, and as I say, Enterprise 2.0 or collaboration tools allow a lot of that to happen. So that's, to me, the three legs of the stool. Hopefully that definition helped a bit, Terrence.
Yeah, absolutely. There, with the Learning 2.0, would you say there has to be a technology element or not?
I would argue that there definitely has to be these days, and
Hmm.
I've got, I think, folks uh, in disagreement with that particular statement. But you can't evolve the learning profession unless you also have very good acumen on the technology front. I mean, Terrence and Rick, this session today, we're using Skype, we're using all kinds of other back-end technologies. You've got a chat stream happening. People can like this in Facebook or Twitter with tweets. Like this is sort of your panacea example where I'm in Vancouver, you guys are in the States in California, and here we are having a chat.
Hmm.
Um, think about that for organizations that are 1,000 people in nature or 100,000. You do need this technology to connect people because so many more people are now working from home. They're having flexible work styles, working different types of shifts. They're in the field. And with a BlackBerry or an iPhone that has webcams in there, and you can actually take videos in the field of a customer site, or when maybe something technologically goes wrong. How can you not have technology in that equation of learning 2.0?
No, that's true. And it's interesting because the chat so far, we have had guests in Canada with you. We've had people in Belgium, England, let's see, India.
Yeah.
And everybody's just like we're here. It's actually pretty amazing if you think the strides we've made in the last 5 years alone in technology and getting everybody closer together. It's pretty mind-boggling, actually.
Well, yeah, and if you think about it also, I mean, I don't necessarily want to harp on the fact that there are budgetary constraints everywhere. But the fact of the matter is that I'll look at corporate just for a second here. The gravy train of, increasing learning and development budgets is yesterday's news. It's just not going to happen. So if we, again, as sort of those learning professionals, those pioneers, aren't using our intelligence and our technology acumen to find ways in which to infuse that into the learning model, then really you're left at the devices of the organization saying, okay, well, I'm going to use this, I'm going to use that, I'm going to use this. And really, as sort of learned learning professionals, we're not in that mix. I think that's, obviously cause and pause for concern.
Well, one of the things that if you look at the learning industry, a lot of trainers hide. They don't want to get out there. They don't really want to be seen that much in the company. They do their job. They try to remain a little bit under the radar, get away from layoffs. Even CLOs many times aren't really out there, or they're reporting to the wrong people. All too often, CLOs either report to IT or to, even worse, accounting. And occasionally they report to HR. It just really depends on how the organization is structured. Rarely do they report directly to upper management. So there's always that thing that training hasn't really been, at least in corporations and even in government, that aggressive in establishing that stake.
Well, I mean, there's a couple ways to answer that. So whether you're a trainer, whether you're a CLO, just generally I'll speak a broad stroke within the learning vertical itself. I don't personally care where it reports. I think that learning professionals, be it the executive or the trainers, and I'll being Canadian, I'll use a hockey analogy here. We got to stop playing goalie. We got to start playing more like Wayne Gretzky. And what I mean by that is, it's often, I think, just the DNA of the learning profession that we play defense, or we're sort of stopping the puck, as opposed to what Gretzky used to do as sort of the penultimate hockey player of all time. He'd go to where the puck is and he'd think ahead and he'd be that visionary. And so, a lot of people forget that he has the most number of goals ever scored in a season with 92, unheard of. But everyone thinks about him as the visionary and the playmaker. So he's actually both. He was there scoring goals, and I think that's where learning professionals need to get aggressive. And I think they need to start putting the puck in the net. As much as they need to be the visionary and assisting with the playmaking of where learning is going. And that means partnering with the CIO. That means partnering with the CFO. That means getting in there and saying, look, this is the strategy, this is the vision, this is where we should be going to get to that sort of collaborative ecosystem, and back to the three legs of the stool I talked about.
We do have a question here. I think in part you might have answered this question from Leva, and and it almost sounds like a question of culture. And when I say culture, not culture across geographic boundaries, but culture across different business structure. She's wondering if, or she's having a challenge where her students are less likely or inhibited to share, just for probably any number of reasons. And she's wondering what are some of the challenges with getting people to participate in an Enterprise 2.0 or Learning 2.0 environment. And I'm not using those words interchangeably. I know they're distinctly different.
And Leva is a university professor in Belgium.
Excellent. Well, I'm certainly not trying to point people to a blog that I posted, but here's what I did blog about a couple weeks ago. It was a two-part blog. It was called, at first, Lurking is Learning. And then the second follow-up was Learning is Lurking. And so what I effectively meant by that was in society today, whether you're at higher ed, whether you're K-12, whether organizations, whether you're not-for-profits, I think we're all different types of learners. We still have different learning styles. So yeah, we all got shepherded into the classrooms, but think about those classrooms. Don't you recall that there was always sort of the chap or the gal who would answer all the questions? Don't you remember that there was always those people who sat at the back of the room, kind of goofing off? And don't you remember those people who were fastidiously taking notes the entire time that the sage on the stage was talking? That meant that there are different types of learning styles. Some people emote, some people lurk, and some people goof off and process later. We really have to recognize that even though we do want it to be sort of more collaborative and over time seeing much more engagement with the user, frankly, the matter is that when people are lurking in environments, in fact, they're learning because that's their style. And over time, I think we have still some opportunity to help them get over that, well, how do I start actually discussing or contributing or putting my opinion out there as much as we did in the classroom. And then conversely, I think there's, when I say learning is lurking, I think folks that are much more aggressive in their comments and like sort of want to be the me, like look at me syndrome. They need a lesson in how to scale back some of that and to reach out directly to help people with their apprehension to actually get online and ultimately contributing. I don't know if that helps a bit, Terrence.
For the comment, and I also posted the link to that blog post in the chat window too. So I encourage everybody to go check that out. That's a two-part blog post as well. And I'm finding too in many times in professional organizations too that are supposed to be at the forefront of Learning 2.0. There still is a bit of a challenge to even get the members of those organizations. I'll leave names out. To participate
come on, tell us
in
names.
Learning 2.0.
Well, let's answer Bill Cush's question here, or comment, right? He says, hoarding knowledge and information is prevalent in corporate world too, challenge to 2.0 world. So the way that I'll sort of take that response or that anecdote is that I don't disagree. And if you think about first of all, I'll answer this in two parts, or sort of get the discussion going in two parts. Everyone should be familiar with, how's this going?
Yep, I think
the technology adoption curve shows that there are individuals who are at the bleeding edge. I need everything that's new and up to date, and I'm going to dive in heads first because I have gumption. I have bravado, and I'm going to do this because that's just my DNA. And then on the far hand side of the adoption curve, we have sort of reading edge. And the reading edge people are those that are very tentative. They're not there yet at all in terms of the adoption of technology. Now let's take that same example inside of an organization. When it comes to, Bill's point about hoarding knowledge and sort of the information, composition of keeping or in fiefdoms, what have you. That actually comes full circle to my point that there's three legs of this transformation stool. So we've talked a bit about Enterprise 2.0, where you need those technologies first and foremost. Then you talked about Learning 2.0, so that's the transformation of learning from always in a classroom or always formal to formal, informal, social. But let's think about leadership, so a new leadership style for organizations. We really need to get ahead of the curve with some of our organizations to say, you know what? There are better ways in which to lead. And first and foremost, leadership is for all. And so if you're building a leadership model that's much more collaborative, that's much more open, that's transparent, that's connecting dots to people, that's saying, look, it's okay to share, it's encouraged. And all of those different pieces that allow it, again, eventually, if I go back to my adoption curve model, it will be a better place for all of us. But we can't, as professionals, expect that everyone's going to be using the technology first, that everyone's going to be using Learning 2.0 first, and that if you don't have a leadership model that's that way, that everyone's going to be using sort of that leadership model. You have to really think about it, to me, in all three veins.
And, it's a good point, too, because the sharing part is really important, and yet you have a lot of people who refuse to share. It's like you said, it's in their DNA. It's whatever it might. They're either shy or they just don't want to share, or they have their own agendas. So that's, there's always going to be that human factor of not everybody's going to go, no matter how much the organization may model that sharing or that sharing concept, or they try to encourage it, there's still a lot of organizations, probably a large majority, that don't really want that much sharing. They want a certain amount of sharing, but at certain levels. And we still see that in most of the large companies. A little bit different in smaller to mid-sized companies because there's a more entrepreneurial sense. But in the larger companies, it's much more process-driven, where all of a sudden, unless we incorporate process into the into the sharing into the process, it happens less and less, unless, of course, you have an individual who likes to share. Do you have any ideas on that one?
Yeah, I do. And again, it's a wonder. This is just wonderful chatting about this with you two, because you're right. You can't just. I call it the spaghetti test. So you can't just throw up some spaghetti on the fridge and hope that it sticks for an organization. If we all espouse Learning 2.0, if we all espouse Enterprise 2.0, and a new leadership model, and just say, here you go, don't forget to turn the lights off when you leave the room, how the hell is that going to work? So you're dead right, Rick. You have to find ways in which to embed this into the vernacular, into the culture, into your work processes. And if you're not, then again, it just becomes what I call sort of an SOS, or shiny object syndrome. And, that might be tongue-in-cheek a bit, but there's no way in which to actually, allow this thing to happen appropriately unless you find ways in which to embed it. So no particular example here that's better than the other, but I'll just bring up a couple. So let's say that you were looking to launch a coaching model for your organization. So would you launch a coaching model that is separate, segregated, different from the way in which that you're bringing about a leadership model, Enterprise 2.0 and Learning 2.0 to life? Would it be this sort of self-contained event that isn't, as I say, interwoven into the things that you espouse to help change that more collaborative, open, sharing culture?
No, you'd want it consistent.
Exactly. So why, go hire a separate consulting firm to build you a coaching model unless you've already decided what your leadership framework should be, what your learning vision is, and how you're going to use the technologies to allow that to happen? There's one example. Another one is, let's say, you need some help with career development at your company. So your employees are saying, look, I'm okay in my career, but I don't know where to go next. I don't have any help. Well, let's say you're building out some sort of career help center. Well, when you build out that career help center, for example, is that center going to be part formal, part informal, part social? Will you use some of the 2.0 technologies? And then how does that look when you sort of may have said, well, we better build out this career development framework such that it employs a leadership model that, again, is much more open and transparent and collaborative, so that people, for example, would be sharing their career stories. Maybe they want to go record themselves with a 5-minute video and put that up inside of a career center, if you're following me, right? So just two examples that are pretty real for everyone, whether it's coaching and career development, that you can employ the model itself.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Actually, I hadn't thought about that, but to use that technology, for example, for somebody inside a company who wants to move to different areas, record a little video audio interview. That's actually really clever. Yeah, take advantage of the technology that's out there.
Yeah.
You know, in one of your more recent blog posts, you had stated something which kind of resonated for me, and it's that business really hasn't changed. We've always been social. There's always been social business. It's just now with the media that access to that social aspect of our business now just becomes exponential. And I think that that's such a key ingredient in helping people realize that in many ways, these social tools are not asking you to do anything that you haven't been doing for your entire life. They're simply allowing you to do it easier, faster, and across borders that you couldn't have done in the past.
I mean, I couldn't say it any better, Terrence. That's exactly it. But one of the problems, I think, is many of us, and I am guilty at this, is we're all, you know, this is nascent times, right? So this really has started to take off the last 3 years or so. And much like we were, as I mentioned before, we put an E in front of everything 15, 20 years ago. Now we're putting, you know, a 2.0 at the end of everything, or a social at the beginning of everything.
Unless you're Apple, in which case you put an I in front of everything, and probably a 4.0 because they're so much better.
Fair enough.
I had to get our Apple rant in there, but
you're not pulling me in again on that one, Rick.
Yeah, I wonder
the
if
crowds have finally dispersed outside my window.
I just wondered if they have a patent to the eyeball.
The eyeball, yeah. As long as it's not flash, they're happy.
So I noticed here someone were asking about lurking. Maybe I'll come back to that for a second. Mm-hmm. Lurking, as I mentioned, it's kind of an important part to the puzzle. So I'll go back to those examples. Like, let's use the career sort of center. I don't think an expectation of everyone at the organization is that they will contribute to that portal. So you're going to have a lot of employees in your organization. They're going to be like hanging out at the career portal and looking at stuff, just reading it and digesting it. That to me is what a lurker is. And it's not meant to be a pejorative or negative term. It's just sort of an online term where someone is reading, really. Let's just call it that. But it's a very important part. It's just that, as I've mentioned with the technology adoption curve, we'd like to get lurkers contributing more over time. But, you know, this is a marathon, not a Usain Bolt 100-meter dash. We're really going to have to work on this over the course of that marathon.
Well, yeah, and the lurkers love the anonymity more often than not. They want to be involved, but they're a little afraid. So they just kind of watch from a distance. You know, it's funny. I have a theory that the biggest lurkers are probably the managers who aren't quite sure what to do with all this stuff, and they just want to kind of, let's keep an eye on it, see what's going on, and, somebody saw me. You know, there's still a lot of the old-style management technique that the manager is supposed to know more than everybody, and as a result, they're nervous when they don't. So, of course, you've got all the new technologies, you've got new training, you've got communities building, you've got Twitter, Facebook, whatever, and the manager all of a sudden turns into more of a coach, into more of an organizer than they do a straight-out leader, though sometimes a leader is required to act in different ways. So I think until we can also get the managers into the fold, it's not going to trickle down quite as well to everybody else, though you never know. Obviously, we're seeing massive changes in, like you said, the last 3 years, and more coming. Only more are going to come. Oh,
and that's just it, right? I mean, we are at. I've said this before. I think, it's sort of using a Churchillian quote. It's sort of the end of the beginning, right? And so if we're at the bleeding edge of change for what is this kind of technology curve, or the combination of Learning 2.0 with Enterprise 2.0, we really all have to recognize this as leaders and take charge, back to the Gretzky analogy.
Can you think of any companies, let's say e-learning companies, that are spearheading e-learning 2.0? The Adobes, the Articulates, anybody else that you can think of that may be pushing forward to make 2.0 a little bit more of a reality rather than just a moniker?
Yeah, I've got a few, and the no slight to those that I don't mention. Let's just put it that way. So the folks over at Skillsoft, as much as I've been pushing them over the last couple of years to move towards more of their traditional e-learning content to be in bite-sized chunks, manageable, and ultimately, not less of this sort of 3-hour e-learning course. Not only have they listened to that feedback, and now it's much more decoupled and much more, I'll call it nugget-based. Over on their Books 24/7 application, there now they have introduced something called Ingenious. And Ingenious is a quote-unquote social way for users to be kind of like a la Amazon, exchanging comments and rating books. I mean, a very simple addition to something like that can go a long way, because if you think about when, we started out on eBay, when eBay was sort of in its infancy, you had to sort of say, well, do I trust, this seller? And you would do that based on feedback from others. That's collective intelligence defined. And so now, Books 24/7, as an example, has sort of taken that and said, all right, I'm going to trust the opinion and the feedback of someone, whether or not I want to read this book or this article or what have you. And I think that's just one little small step for a company of Skillsoft size, but they're listening to what's happening in sort of the transformation of society. So there's one for you, Rick.
And one thing that's good about that is that they're encouraging other people to take the training. By their comments, people are more motivated to take the training. And it's actually brilliant. I remember when Amazon started doing that, a lot of people said, you're allowing people to review products they didn't buy from the Amazon site. That's risky. Yeah. But it works. It works. And you know what? Everybody's shopping, and more often than not, Amazon does have better prices. And it's a great way to find out, well, let's see, I want to buy that TV. Is that a good TV? Is that a bad TV? Let's see what other people think. And you take it with a grain of salt, because you start figuring out who has valid opinions, who's sort of just out there. And you can also see who's posting and what they've posted. It's almost like there's professional posters out there who just spend all their time reviewing products. But it does help. And I think from a learning point of view, it motivates people to actually get involved as well. If you take a class and you like it, and then somebody else takes it and likes it, all of a sudden you comment about it, maybe you can get 3, 4, or 5 more people or 100 more people involved in it. So as a result, you are now making a big difference in how that's getting, let's say, distributed throughout the whole enterprise. Yeah,
I mean, when you sort of, I use this analogy sometimes. So when you're going on a vacation, or you're sort of saying, hey, I want to take vacation, often I think what we do is we sort of ask around our friends and we say, hey, have you been on any good vacations? Or where would you recommend that I go in Europe? Or have you been to Italy? Oh, where did you go? Where did you stay? I mean, it's as simple an action as that I think we learning professionals need to recognize has to be part of the equation inside our profession.
Yep.
So, when we are building out, God forbid, an LMS, don't build an LMS that's just a course taker and class scheduler. At least if you have to have an LMS, and I can get into that rant later, but if you have to have one, build it such that you have the ability to rank a class, or you can share the feedback from a particular e-learning. don't build an LMS that's just a schedule taker. I mean, that's just crazy.
Yeah, you're
so
right. And most LMSs do nothing more than launch content. That's
exactly.
it. And you're paying a lot of money to launch content. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, you and I could probably have a good rant with that one. I think LMSs are the most overblown, overpriced, worthless pieces of software ever developed. But that's only an opinion, and I love all my LMS friends. So, but it's true when you consider the fact that an LMS costs more than the software that runs your manufacturing, your distribution, and your financial systems. Something is deadly wrong there.
Yeah, and that's it. So the LMS was treated like an ERP.
Mm-hmm.
And think about that statement for a second. Like, how well do we enjoy ERPs?
Well, yeah, and I used to implement ERP systems, so I know all about ERP. It's that was my previous career. We did a lot of that kind of, and we basically, to midsize and Fortune 500 type companies, we installed ERP software. And then you come in with an LMS that costs $500,000, and you just kind of shake your head and go, all right. And what's the purpose of this? And what do you actually get out of it afterwards, since most people never check the analytics afterwards? It's an interesting...
Well, for our Australian friends, that's a dog's breakfast.
Yeah, I may have to call you and ask you to send me some information on the LMSs that do have the social tools, because somebody had asked me, tweeted me a question, and is there a list that exists out there of these LMSs that do that? And I'm kind of at my wit's end in finding a conclusive list, but perhaps it's an opportunity to start building a list of those tools.
Well, I think the problem is they're not tweeting out that the fact that they do have social media content, so it's sort of interesting.
Yeah, so they don't use the social media to promote their social media tools.
A lot of them use social media in the intranet, not to the outside. So you have kind of a very sterile social media environment, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's very interesting. So I'll take that and go in for the jugular for a second here, because I truly believe that if you take an example where Learn.com was purchased by Taleo, you've got sort of this talent, career, learning, performance development, convergence happening from an application perspective. But then put on your Enterprise 2.0 hat for a second here and ask yourself, what's cropping up with ever more frequency inside of organizations? And that's collaboration platforms, the so-called social business platform, or the so-called Enterprise 2.0 platform. So be that as it may, Confluence or Jive or SharePoint 2010, well, you name it. Like, there's a whole whack of them there. Why are they popping up? Well, they're popping up because organizations want to connect people to people and people to content. And then when you have over here the last bastion of the Wild West, which is the LMS, as this sort of standalone thing where I go to register for a course or to take my e-learning, that's crazy. That's formal content that should have the ranking, that should have the comment, that should have discussion inside of the collaboration platform, so that informal documents like PowerPoints can live and breathe with your own internal user-generated videos, that can live and breathe with formal documents that could be a corporate report or a formal e-learning course, and they all should be searchable. They should all be able to be ranked and rated. They should all be able to be promoted accordingly.
Sorry, go
ahead.
I'm sorry. So we're really talking an LCMS, a learning content management system, that also has learning management system capabilities. So all your content could be out there, managed, and also tie that into your social content.
Yeah, I've kind of toyed around with an acronym called CALO, the Collaboration and Learning Output. And, be that as it may, I'm still working on this. But, that whole essence that you have this collaboration platform with, as I say, the wikis and the blogs, and if you build out your own YouTube internally and you build out your own Twitter internally, that's all user-generated content and connecting people to people, people to skills, mentor to mentor, content to people, and what have you. So why is learning anything different? If in fact we say that learning 2.0 is part formal, part informal, and part social, i.e. the enterprise 2.0 bit, I don't understand why the LMS sits way over here. Why isn't that all one big happy family?
Well, that's partly because the LMS vendors haven't really approached the LMS as anything more than launching content.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a cash cow.
It's a cash cow. Though, yeah, I don't know. Some of the LMS vendors have had their rough times over the last several years because when the economy goes down, LMSs aren't so important anymore, especially if they're just launching content. Terrence, any other comments in the chat room before we finalize on this episode?
It looks like Paul has one about maybe it's probably not necessarily meant to be asked, but more I think he's just thinking out loud. But he's just asking, will people gloss over titles and ranks instead of looking at just a thumbs up in regards to the LMS? And I'm not sure I'm giving his question justice because it's part of a thread of conversation. I was trying to find the source to where it started. So if that makes sense to you, I'll let you answer it, Dan. If not, I'll have to come back and look. Maybe Paul can comment in the comment section to elaborate more on what he's asking.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, right? I mean, I think, what we've found is that when you sort of highlight sort of your top 5, top 10 in a particular faculty of content, and that could be a combination of social content, informal content, whatever, like your most viewed, I think those do have merit and weight because people say, oh, look, there's X thousand people looking at this particular piece, and look, there's like 40 discussions or comments, and look, there's 30 thumbs up. That does say something. So, I don't think there's an either or. I really think that you can use both of those opportunities to your advantage. And some cases, we at TELUS will use thumbs up, thumbs down on certain pieces of content, and sometimes we'll use ranking in terms of who's accessed what or number of views. So I don't think there's, I don't think they have to be mutually separated there.
How does that work when you do the thumbs up or other ways of commenting? Do you get a good response out of that?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is a complete adoption of an increasing adoption, should I say, of the way in which people are utilizing this as pervasive tools to help them in their day. So, when, rather than just having to go to the quote unquote LMS and look for the course, what we're finding now is that we're seeing intellectual exchange about ideas. So, an idea that's put out there in, say, a microblog thread, and then that leads to sort of whether people are liking that particular thought or not, and then sometimes that germinates in something. Now, I'll give you another example then, is our web jams. And I think IBM sort of coined the term, so I've stolen it. But web jams are opportunities for you over a period of 5, 10 business days to put a topic out there and using collective intelligence and the social wit of the organization to discuss that particular topic, to have people use thumbs up, thumbs down for sort of each comment, but to continue the dialogue in a very asynchronous way. And, we found a few great nuggets that we otherwise would never have thought of based on, the opportunity to social learn from people's opinions, their experience. And then from there, we have gained an opportunity to either reduce money or improve a process or to gain traction on something else. I mean, it's the new black.
We've been doing that in California for a really long time. Every day somebody posts out, what's for lunch?
Yeah.
We're very simple down here. It's all about feeding us.
Speaking of lunch, I have to ask you, Dan, what's with the fish chips and malt vinegar?
Well, I am a dual citizen from England, both Canadian and English. So to me, fish and chips and sort of malt vinegar, that analogy is, again, that we're really talking about the convergence of all of these pieces coming together. So, I don't think that you can have enterprise 2.0 technologies without thinking through the learning implications, without thinking through the culture or engagement of your organization, without thinking through what leadership framework do you need to invest in or reinvest in with your org? I mean, to me, it's sort of it's inexplicable, and frankly, I think it's negligent of learning professionals to myopically think that they can just sit in a classroom and teach. It is no longer that's no longer the bailiwick of control, or control is probably the wrong
and let's
word.
not even talk about the back channel. That's another whole issue there while they're teaching.
Exactly. I mean, if we're so naive to think that in a classroom, and the classroom's not going away, it's still a very important part of the equation. But if we're so naive to think that, on breaks, if they're not talking about the content over the last 2 hours or what the instructor had for lunch, I mean, that's crazy. Like that was the original back channel. So now it just so happens that through Enterprise 2.0 technologies, the learning profession is being shooken up, and it's like eat or be eaten. So I'd rather play offense.
I often wonder, how could some people, and it really just comes down to a level of naivety, but how could they talk ROI and the Kirkpatrick's levels of evaluation, and then badmouth the back channel? Because the back channel really gives you a level 1, 2, and even upwards of 3 evaluation, and it's live, and it gives it to you right there and then.
It does, but I'll take the other devil's advocate point of view. At times, the back channel can be extremely disrespectful. And so you start having a society that doesn't really respect who's teaching what, because we tend to a certain point, create a lot of mediocrity too. A lot of times, if everybody has something valid to say, does everybody really have something valid to say? Sometimes not. We tend to go to the lowest common denominator right now rather than lift it up a bit. And I think that's one of the negatives of the back channel, good and bad. It has
and in many ways, I would welcome that into courses that I teach. If somebody's being disrespectful, it's giving me a pure assessment of level 1. It's letting me know, and because on a smile sheet, everybody's going to put, this is the best thing since sliced bread. But if you're getting emotion and drive, and people are speaking out on that back channel, it really lets you know, in my opinion, a better representation of, is the learner really appreciating the content that you delivered?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you're bringing up an interesting sub-thread. I'm not sure if you intended to, but that's the whole Kirkpatrick debacle. Yeah. And I'm not going to win any friends over this one, but that family has single-handedly handcuffed the learning profession to think that performance improvement occurs in a classroom, and I just completely am diametrically opposed to that.
Yeah, I agree.
And so we over at TELUS are coming up with our own new sort of what I'll call, I use this because I'm now being cheeky, a metrics 2.0 model. So rather than just, what everyone does, sort of the level 1 smile sheets, and then sort of someone hopefully getting to level 3 at least, and asking, did your performance change 6 months later? That's not the model really in society. I think the learning profession needs to reinvent Kirkpatrick and ultimately say, look, there are all these components to performance improvement. That could be your network. That could be your ability to both lurk and contribute. That could be your formal learning opportunities. That could be your informal, like what books have you read? What live discussions have you been a part of like this? Do you involve yourselves in chats? And then, there is some grading going on at some point, of course. So some people need to be, evaluated and or formally graded in their role, depending on who they are. And so you add this all up, and that's, to me, what I would call the quintessential return on performance, not what Kirkpatrick leads you to believe, that it is sort of these event-driven pieces, particularly in a formal learning environment. So I think we have some work to do in this profession to unlearn what we've learned.
Rick and I love hearing the controversy, though.
Controversy's good. Anyway, that is the music telling us that we are pretty much up at our hour. We've been on for about 50 minutes, and Dan, I want to thank you greatly for joining us today, and we hope you can come again later on during the year. It's been a good discussion. I think you've got a ton to offer. And I think we've only touched the surface, and we haven't made Terrence nervous yet. We have to get more controversial, so that's good. Terrence, as always.
I will go out and have some, for lunch, I'm going to have some fish chips and malt vinegar.
Excellent.
Anyway, Dan, appreciate you coming by today. We're actually going to be live as soon as we stop this recording, so if you want to hang on for a moment, we'll be right back. And Terrence, as always, a pleasure having you on board. And
Rick, before you
Yes.
sign off, next week we have Corrine Albrecht from Tandem Learning, and she'll be talking about augmented reality games.
that sounds great. And we might have an augmented reality show. Hey, we might actually be real for a change. Anyway, guys, thank you very much. And this concludes the recorded portion of the show. We will be live again in a moment.